Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to lecture 12 of Gender and Society. This lecture is going to be on technology and healthcare. So in the past lecture you have seen that what are the various ramifications, what are the various processes that are at play between gender and health. So we have in the past lecture explored the various understandings of health, from the classic biomedical model to understanding of health using the holistic model, and then we have looked at how the World Health Organization actually defines health as. And we have seen that how our biological understanding, how our socio-cultural understanding, all of that actually combine together to inform what we understand as health of a person or health of a society. So in this lecture what I am going to do is walk you through some of the basic understandings of how technology actually combines with the idea of health, and some of the very important emerging fields of study, some of the very important emerging questions that are interrogated in this regard. So before I start, I want to let you know that just like gender and society is a heavily interdisciplinary field, topics such as technology's role on healthcare, or how healthcare and technology inform each other, is sitting at the intersection of multiple disciplines. So we will see how these intersections actually work out, but just to start with a couple of key questions here, that how can our understandings of gender be informed by exploring the socio-technical relations of information and communication technologies, or ICTs, in healthcare. So how does gender actually inform the idea of ICT, and in vice versa, how does ICT actually give us newer understanding of how gender is negotiated as a process. And the second question that we will be looking at is, how far can an appreciation of the ways in which gender works inform and improve our understanding of how ICTs are being developed, implemented and used in healthcare contexts. So as you can imagine, and as you already may have identified, that one of the intersections of talking about technology and healthcare, which is a huge field, and it is practically impossible to talk about all the technological advances in just one lecture, but as you can imagine that the role of information technology, the role of information and communication technology is at the very heart of the matter, is sitting at the very core of the matter. Also sitting at the very core of the matter is a sociological understanding of how technology and healthcare inform each other. So we have an emerging idea of self-care, which is highly culturally driven, and it's promoted through cultural practices and social practices and government policies. So we see this idea of a transition from curing a disease as you have seen in the last lecture that of the several transitions that we have made in this respect, this is one such that we have transitioned from the idea of curing to the idea of preventive ways, and to the idea of self-care, to the idea that what can you do to take care of yourself, what can you do to prevent falling sick. And the very technologies that redefine health are also the means through which this individualization can occur, through e-health, diagnostic tests, and the commodification of restorative tissue such as stem cells and clone embryos. So you see that the premise, the boundary of this field of technology and healthcare is huge. So we are talking on the one hand about self-care, everyday living, day-to-day life. We are talking about restorative tissues. We are talking about examples of stem cells, clone embryos. So you can imagine the breadth of the the field of technology in use of technology in healthcare services. So from a sociological perspective, when we talk of digital health, we come across 4 broad areas that inform each other, and they inform and they make possible the growth of digital health. So as you can see, digital health is sitting at the center of these broad disciplines of sociology of health, sociology of algorithms, computational social science, critical digital sociology. So all of these actually merge at a point to give us an understanding of digital health or digital healthcare. So when you have to understand how digital health works, it will be important for you to bring in some of the understanding from each of these fields of inquiry. So what we have seen that over time, the idea of digital healthcare has progressed through several stages. So starting as early as 2003, as you can see, where it was imagined to be an age of learning in terms of digital healthcare, and scholars were asking sort of questions that what is it and why should we care about digital healthcare. So that was that was one of the introductory phases, one of the first phases when the idea of digital healthcare was actually introduced in society, that scholars and practitioners and researchers, they were trying to understand that what is digital healthcare and why should we care about digital healthcare, what is it that it is giving us an added advantage. So it started from there, and then we go to the age of interest. The second stage is the age of interest, that how can we seed innovation. So now we have accepted that we understand, or we kind of understand what digital healthcare is, and so how can we make it more innovative. So how can we start discovering newer avenues, understanding newer concepts with regard to digital healthcare. The third stage, that the age of implementation, is asking how can we do digital health well. So the first 2 phases were actually invested in understanding what is it, and then from the third phase onwards, which is the current phase that we are in, is questioning that how can we do digital health well, what is it that we need to do to progress, make progress with this idea. And the next phase that is projected to be the age of scale, that is how can we maximize our impact. So we have gone through asking what is it, how is it, and then we are asking how can we maximize the impact of digital healthcare. So as you can see that we are currently in the third stage, going on to the fourth stage soon, that we are now engaged more with the question of how can we do digital health better, and then what are the benefits that we are gaining, and how can we maximize the impact of digital healthcare in society. So we have seen, just to give you some idea of how health information systems work, we have seen that there has been changing boundaries and relationships between traditional producers and users of health information. So the relationship between producers and users have undergone a change, and this has been manifested or facilitated by the collection of health information. So how information about health is collected, the distribution of health information to citizens. So how or how well accessible are these information to the people in the society, and the growth of new imaging technologies. So what are the newer ways of applying technology to image processing with regard to healthcare. And here you can see this is actually a research work that was done by a set of scholars. So you can follow this link if you want to read up about this paper. This is just showing an application of medical imaging technologies, and how can we take it a step further. So we have also seen that the government of India has invested a lot in understanding digital health, and to the extent that we have the national health portal by the government of India, and you see some snapshots from the website, that it has become a serious national policy. And if you go to this website, it is very informative in the sense that it will give you information at the click of a button about hospitals, about doctors, about self-care. So we have seen that at the national level we do have a very serious effort going on with regard to digital health. And in the National Health Policy of 2017, we see that these targets, these goals are actually quite spelled out. For example, I'm quoting from the policy, that leveraging the potential of digital health for systematic linkages between the various levels of care, that is primary, secondary and tertiary, would ensure continuity of care. So they're pointing out that this the level of healthcare should include all of these levels of primary, secondary, tertiary, and that is what is going to ensure the continuity of care of the society. Then they also talk about the digital health technology ecosystem, which is the National Digital Health Authority, or the NDHA, will be set up to regulate, develop and deploy digital health across the continuum of care. So they're actually having a health authority to look more deeper into the ideas of digital health. And the road ahead from here is to understand then what are the various applications of digital health in society. So from a sociological perspective, when we try to talk about digital healthcare and gender, digital reproductive healthcare is one of the emerging and very significant areas of inquiry in this respect. So let me just also remind you that when we are talking about digital healthcare, we are also talking about some factors such as understanding of a traditional healthcare. So what it means, say if we take the example of reproductive healthcare, so what it would mean traditionally with regard to reproductive healthcare. computer literacy. So how well can a person use computers, or rather does a person have access to computers or not. Media access and usage. So again, the question of resource access and the question of how well can you use some of these data that is available, and the idea of health awareness, the idea of health concern. How much does it affect you? How much do you value it? Actually go a long way to inform our understanding of digital healthcare. So where we see this, the idea of digital reproductive healthcare, we can talk about it in three possible ways. So the first way that we can talk about it is talking about discourse and practice. So if you look at how discourse and praxis operate, so these are classic ways of understanding that what people say and what people do in society. So the relationships between discourse, structure, and action in this case are analyzed, and with regard to praxis, the questions concerned around what are the various values, what are the various norms, what are the various expectations that are implicated in such technological applications. So that is one way, and there is another way of understanding. So what are the expectations of these applications on healthcare, and how is the understanding of the human body actually changing with the application of digital practices. So the idea of digital embodiment. So how is understandings of motherhood, of fatherhood, of self-care, of monitoring the body. So how are these ideas changing over time with the use of digital healthcare, and the idea of intersectionality being scaled. So this is also emerging field of inquiry in sociological study, that we talked about the idea of intersectionality, where we look at a person's social location based on the various axes of differences, such as gender, such as age, such as religion, nationality, ethnicity, and here you can see it's sketched out that way. So the intersectionality that is also scaled, which means that this intersectionality is negotiated at various geographic scales, from the starting from the body, starting from the family to the region, to the group, to the national, to the international. So all of these geographic scales at which it is negotiated. So this is some of the significant ways you can actually understand the idea of digital reproductive healthcare, so through discourse and praxis, through digital embodiments, and by understanding how intersectionality is scaled. So as I said, that the idea of technology and healthcare and gender is actually very overlapping, and it shares a lot of understanding with each other and with other fields. So if we look at gender and technology, we see that this relationship between gender and technology looks at the social shaping approach, which is hierarchical, inflected by social class and gender. So the relationship between gender and technology is socially shaped and socially constructed to a large extent. The relationship between technology and health brings with it the understandings of the sociology of science and technology studies, or STS, as it is popularly known, the socio-technical perspectives on health informatics. So, health informatics or social informatics is a field that has emerged for quite a few years now, although work is going on in this regard, quite significant work going on in this regard. But then this field, technology and health, actually again looks at this socio-technical perspective, that it is a product of the social and in society. And the third key area of inquiry in this respect is gender and health, something that we have looked at in the last lecture, that what can be the gendered health consequences, specific health risks women and men face in society. So, this is a relationship that we have explored in the last lecture, and it forms the third key area of inquiry in this respect. So, in this respect, we also have to understand another theoretical framework that we may find helpful to understand how technology works with human aspects of healthcare. So, this is called the actor network theory, and the human and the non-human, as the theory states, should be integrated into the same conceptual framework and assigned equal amounts of agency. So, this is a theory that comes from a sociological background, where it is proposed that there is a relationship between human and non-human artifacts or structures, and they can be studied as part of the conceptual framework. And when we talk of agency and when we talk of discourse, so we in this actor network theory, we see that equal amounts of agency are actually put in the human and non-human components, and as is prevalent in the discourse. So, this theory, this actor network relationship, actually explores how relationships between people, objects and concepts are formed and why. So, as human beings, we deal with a lot of non-human things, and so there exists a relationship between that human and non-human, and this theory actually helps us to understand how all of those relations are built, and then how can we make meaning of why such relations are formed between the human and the non-human. So, here in this graph, as you can see, this is used as an example here, that this shows a relationship between users, graphical user interface designer, applications, customers, so all sorts of things that can be human or non-human, and they are put in a network to understand how one relates to another. So, this is another example to show that borrowing from the actor network theory, we can think of developing mobile analytics, and say for example you want to build an app that measures, or that tells you something about a health condition, maybe a reproductive health condition, maybe a health condition such as diabetes. So, you want to develop that app, and this is one way of understanding that if you have the app, if you want the app as an end product, then you have to first have an understanding of who that app is going to be used by. And if you don't have an understanding of the society or the type of people who will be using that app, then chances are that after you have built that app, there may be people or society who are not willing to use that app. So, to do a study before making an app will just help you cater or deliver the society better. So here you can see that the development of mobile analytics, that it is kind of a, again, an actor network idea, where you have the human and the non-human components here, who are not just in a network, but also in kind of a flow with each other. So this is the type of relationship that may be understood using the actor network idea. So just to emphasize that how important is it for us to understand that apps or applications are socio-cultural artifacts. They are as much socio-cultural products as they are technical products. So here is a very powerful quote by Lupton in 2014, that apps are new digital technology tools, but they are also socio-cultural products. They are active participants that shape human bodies and selves as part of heterogeneous networks, creating new practices and knowledge. They are therefore generative, a productive form of power. So you see that from this quote, it is not just evident that apps are socio-cultural products, but they are also a source of power relationship. They are also informing sort of power dynamics in society. So apps have a potential to shape the ways in which the human body is understood, visualized and treated by healthcare workers and non-professional people alike. So every time you would use an app, you will see that how much of a socio-cultural understanding has gone behind crafting or behind building that app, as much as it would need a technological idea, technological skill. But it is probably impossible to not think about apps without these socio-cultural components. So they are as much socio-cultural products as they are technological products. So this is one point where we need to assert that the relationship between technology and healthcare, in terms of when it's talking about the embodiment or discourse or praxis, it's one of socio-technical ensemble. So it's one of it's bringing together all of these socio-cultural factors to inform a product of technology. So we have also seen that social media plays a huge role in healthcare services, and this is one way that social media allows more people to take part in the discussion and share knowledge. So for example, take Facebook, take Twitter. How much of interaction, how much of discussion and knowledge sharing actually go on is unimaginable. So over time, social media has become one of the most important platforms for knowledge sharing, knowledge production and discussion. Social media also creates cognitive and real surpluses that can free up our resources to deal with essential needs. So this is a cognitive journey that you make with social media that is factored into everyday living. And it democratizes the decision making process so that needs find solutions rather than other way around. So it just gives us as society a platform for making decisions and then finding solutions. So the idea of social media has factored into people's life now in such intricate ways that it is difficult not to pay attention to practices regarding that. So, the fact that digital media culturally matters is undeniable, but showing how, where and why it matters is necessary to push against peculiarly narrow presumptions about the universality of digital experience. And this was proposed by Coleman in 2010, where the scholar is saying that we know for sure that there is a very important cultural implication of our digital media, but what is not clear yet, and probably this will be a work in progress for the next decade or so, that how, where and why it matters will give us much better idea to break free of narrow presumptions that the digital experience is universal for everyone. It is not, and therefore we need to know, we need to understand that how, where and why do these experiences differ, and what are the emerging patterns out of such differences. So, having accepted the fact that there is a huge cultural implication on the use of the digital healthcare systems, let's now look at one of the areas in which in terms of reproductive healthcare where technology has played a huge role and continues to do so in understanding various sociological ramifications in society, and this is the case of the assisted reproductive technologies. So, over time we have seen that there are these efforts, whether it's traditional healthcare or digital healthcare, or however you want to put it, that societies have tried to address issues of globalization, issues of inequalities through various technological ventures. And one of the inequalities that can be talked about in this respect is the idea of infertility. And infertility affects more than 15% of all reproductive aged couples worldwide at some point in their lives. So, it's a very significant global problem that we see worldwide. Infertility affects around 80 million women and men worldwide, a global reproductive health problem. So, it has been put forward as a global reproductive problem, or a global reproductive health issue that affects this huge number of around 80 million women and men worldwide, and so it is not unique to any particular society, not unique to any particular country or group of people. Now, what has shifted over time and space probably is the idea that infertility, if we have to term it as a problem, I like to call it as an issue, not a problem. The focus has shifted from being a female's problem to a couple's problem. So, that is a major shift in focus that we see, that infertility, the changing ideas around infertility is brought about in society, is that now it's looked at as couples problem, and therefore scholarly work actually addresses it as a reproductive aged couples problem. So, we see this is a quite significant couples problem across the world, and we see that the various technologically assisted reproduction is largely restricted to the global elites, whereas the infertile poor, who are at the highest risk of infertility, are devalued. So, there are some patterns, there are some trends that come out of how technology actually has influenced the reproduction process. So, what is seen that it is largely restricted to the global privileged class, the global elites, whereas the poor people who suffer from infertility and who are the highest risk of infertility are actually kind of left out of the process, left out of the technological assistance. And we see that as a result of that, there is a pattern called stratified reproduction, which are the ways in which political, economic and social forces structure the conditions that which women carry out physical and social reproductive labor. So we see that it gives rise to a stratification in society because of this class based access to resource. So this is one way of understanding how stratas are created in society, how social forces structure conditions, and so this is what the assisted ARTs, as it popularly known as, have brought in society, that they have also brought with it an understanding of stratified reproduction. So what has been seen over time in terms of embodiment and subjectivities, if we have to talk about the role of digital embodiment here, that ARTs are gendered technologies with highly specific and differentiated applications on men's and women's bodies. So we see that the process in which ARTs are carried out, and there are multiple ways, there are multiple stages that ARTs are carried out, but they if you look at in scholarly research, much of them have described ARTs as gender technologies with differentiated applications on male and female bodies. So more invasive on women's bodies. So practices such as which include ARTs are seen to be more invasive on female bodies, such as practices such as superovulation or injecting hormones, etc. And as an unintended consequence, the very existence of ARTs may serve to reinforce cultural motherhood mandates for women in many societies. And this is a point that you need to understand, that why do we have ARTs to treat infertility or for other reproductive issues, that often there is a cultural understanding in many societies around the world, which is the understanding of the motherhood mandate, that if a woman is diagnosed or if a couple is diagnosed to be infertile, much of the time the blame actually falls on the women for not being able to reproduce, and that brings with it the understanding of the motherhood mandate in that society. And therefore much of these innovations of ARTs have been reinforced by cultural ideas of mandating certain gender roles, and ART is a classic example of that. Women's heightened embodiment of ARTs also manifests in men being treated as the second sex in ART practices and discourses. So for once, in this innovative practice, that scholars have pointed out that traditionally what has happened is women have been labeled as the second sex, and for once in ART, because the focus is on the female body, because the focus is on cultural mandates of women in society, the idea of male privilege is actually taking a backseat here, and men are being treated as the second sex, which is traditionally the reverse, as is seen in scholarship. And in most societies, male infertility remains deeply hidden because of its conflation with impotency and emasculation. So this is again a classic example for you to see that there are these signifiers which are attached to the construction, the cultural construction of masculinity, the cultural construction of femininity. And oftentimes what happens is if an infertility issue is diagnosed in a couple, and if it's the issue is with the male in the couple, oftentimes that remains hidden. Oftentimes it is not exposed, because exposing that will take away the signifying factors of masculinity or the privileged position in society. So it is a very, very common phenomena that if it is a problem, the male infertility is a problem, it remains deeply hidden. It is not spoken about. It's not discussed. So these are, as you can see, some of the major ways in which we can understand the role of ARTs, and by extension the role of digital healthcare practices, as it would have a direct influence on a person or a group or a society. So we have different ideas of embodiment, we have different ideas of subjectivities, and there are social repercussions. So society actually behaves differently, society responds differently with regard to each of these embodiments and subjectivities. So we see that with the application of digital healthcare practices such as assisted reproductive technologies, our understanding of kinship and family has also changed over time. So if you recall some of the understanding from previous lecture on family and gender and kinship, you will see that if we now understand or try to understand those relationships with regard to practices such as surrogacy, that it's the process by which a couple or a family would plan to have a child. So the process of surrogacy, the process of destabilizing biological understandings of the family. So until we know that kinship primarily has been based on a biological understanding of family through kin or blood, through marriage or adoption, and we see that these newer ways of having a family actually destabilizes the biological understanding. It also unseats traditional notions of heterosexual parenthood. So societies, as you know by now, are positioned on an understanding that parenthood must comprise of a heterosexual couple, so between a man and a woman. And with this new forms of technologies, to have family, to have children, to have babies, it is also destabilizing or unseating these traditional notions that there are parents who are who can be either single parent or same-sex parents who have now an option to have a child, to have a baby, and therefore it is challenging the single understanding of family as or parenthood as heterosexual parenthood. And the introduction of ARTs, particularly donor insemination for lesbian and gestational surrogacy for gay men, has led to the queering of reproduction. So as you will see in the lecture on queer theory and queer relations, that this in a way leads to a queering of understanding of how we understand reproduction, and this goes hand in hand with the previous point that we now have newer understandings of how families can be formed in society, and these are some of the ways that are playing very important roles to help us craft new definitions of family, new definitions of social relationships. With that also comes something that is known as embryo ethics, and scholars have pointed out that there can be a lot of ethics that is involved with the ART process. So multiple sets of inequalities surface in the practice of assisted reproduction, reflecting intersecting oppressions based on gender, race, class, and nationality. So as you well know by now that each of these components, gender, race, class, nationality, each of them actually contribute to an understanding of creation of inequality in society. And the practice of assisted reproduction actually makes it more visible, makes it more tangible. So we see that is one of the ethical considerations, or one of the visible concerns. The poor minority women in some countries are being recruited, or as some scholars would say coerced, as gestational surrogates. So you see that the minority women, particularly from rural poor parts of the society, including in India, that are being recruited for this practice of surrogacy, practice of gestational surrogacy. And I would encourage you to look up a few documentaries on surrogacy in India, where the practice has gone through various legislations over time. And I would like you to find out what are those stages that India as a country has gone through, and where do we currently stand in terms of surrogacy. So that is something I want you to find out. And we also see that religion may impact the practices of assisted reproduction more directly. For example, as scholars point out, that across the Sunni Muslim world, gamete donation and surrogacy have been religiously prohibited. So as you can see that one axis of differentiation, religion, can have a direct implication on the idea of assisted reproductive technology. And the idea of egg donation. So one of the processes of the ARTs actually are carried out is when they identify the infertility issue, what they do is they extract the eggs, and they freeze it, and then they would treat it. And then in the meantime, if the eggs are not required, that is the woman conceives and has a child, so these eggs are usually donated to another woman who would need them. Now this comes with a lot of ethical concerns, a lot of ethical questions, that one woman's egg is being donated to another. And I would in this regard, I would encourage you to read up the ART bill of 2014 in India. So as the ART bill says, and it's a long document, so please read it up, that ART today is a 30 billion industry in India, with over 3,000 clinics across the country. Infertility is the commonest medical problem in 30 to 40 years of age group of couples in India. And the ART bill actually points out some of these very important ways in which family, kinship, can be redefined, and some of these ethical connotations around practices such as egg donation. So how do we then understand ARTs with intimate relations in family and marriage? And we see that it is global issue, global infertility, which has several of these social consequences, and either it is treated, or families drift apart, or there are other consequences of infertility. And we have seen that how practices of inclusion of technology in this process of treatment actually creates various forms of embodiments, various forms of subjectivities for the couple involved. And we have also seen that how new directions in kinship and family studies can come out of this understanding of kinship, of this understanding of application of technology in reproductive health care, and which leads also to the question of embryo ethics, as we just discussed, that what are some of these ethical connotations that the ART Bill of 2014 spells out. I again want to emphasize that please go and take a look at the ART bill to find out more about what can be some of the social ramifications. So what we have seen is over time this has been strung into the popular understanding so much that we see news reports, we see newspapers actually doing articles, and this is from one such news article which talks about the people in India still express outrage over the idea of freezing eggs, and they did a very nice story to show what has been the role of ARTs, the role of assisted reproductive technologies, and why is there a disparity in social understanding with regard to that. Why do we have multiple patterns, multiple stages of acceptance with regard to such a technology? And in part, as you will see if you read up the bill and if you read up some of these news articles, that oocyte cryopreservation or egg freezing as part of infertility treatment has been very, very prevalent in recent times in the country and of course globally. But again, it comes at a lot of cost, and the idea of social egg freezing, that you choose it as a lifestyle choice. We see that India as a country is an emerging global market in that social egg freezing, that you choose to freeze your eggs and then you claim it back when you're ready to have a family. So this is just one of the examples for you to see that technological advance in healthcare with regard to gender, such as ART, and ART is a huge field in its own right, can have significant social implications, significant social ramifications, and we have just looked at some of them. So what I want you to do, having read some of these resources and having viewed some of these resources that I just talked about, is to find out what are some of the changing sociological values and norms with respect to gender that are seen with the introduction of digital healthcare in society. So I want you to do some research to find out that traditionally what have been the traditional values, sociological values, norms with regard to gender and healthcare, and are these changing? So are these values and norms changing with regard to gender with the introduction of digital healthcare in society? So this is, I want you to read up some of the research articles, find trends and patterns that we have not talked about in this lecture, and I want you to identify the changing values and norms. And if you want to read up more about how the network in the society works with regard to the information network, you can read up the Manuel Castell's book, The Rise of the Network Society, The Information Age. And in the next lecture, we are going to look at some of these ideas of normativity, subversions, queer identities. I just talked about queering of reproduction in this lecture. So we'll take a look at more deeply what do we exactly understand by that. Thank you.